Janeites, and welcome back to the What the Austen podcast. In this episode, I am joined by the wonderful Hilary Davidson, dress historian, curator, and the author of Jane Austen's Wardrobe and Dress in the Age of Jane Austen. I have both of these books, they're both amazing. In this episode, we are going to be exploring Regency fashion. So I know the episode that I did last year with Shannon about fashion within the adaptations was super popular. So I thought, let's get into things in a little bit more detail. And I thought, who better than, Hilary Davidson to come in and talk about this. So we're going to be discussing Jane Austen's Pelisse. We're going to be discussing the evolution of menswear within the Regency era, and also fashion plates, which I've become more and more fascinated with over the past 18 months or so. So we're going to be talking about what their use was actually in Regency England, and then also just discussing how in Jane Austen's work in particular, fashion and morals and ethics seem to have this kind of blurred boundary, and why Jane Austen uses fashion within her novels to try and articulate that certain characters have kind of not so great morals, or their stance on life is different than the heroines, who don't seem to have this kind of fixation on their fashion or what they're wearing. So all of that we're going to get into today. So I hope you're going to enjoy this episode. So welcome, Hilary. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
The first question that I ask all of my guests is, what got you into Jane Austen originally?
Well, I'd read all the books, as you do, and, I liked and enjoyed Austen, but the whole path to me ending up writing 2 books on Jane Austen began when I was studying in Winchester, the town in southern England where she died and is buried. And because I was doing a master's in the history of textiles and dress, and I have making skills, I was asked by the then keeper of the Hampshire Cultural Trust collection to make a copy of Jane Austen's Pelisse, which is a kind of coat dress, and it's the only known body garment that we have that has a connection of being worn by Austen. So this was way back in, I want to say 2006, 2007. And yes, I got asked to copy this garment. And because of that, I started doing a lot of research into what Jane Austen looked like, into clothing of the period, and it all just kept going from there.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a spiral, but what an incredible project to come your way. Like, that's so amazing. And before then, what was the kind of historical fashion you were focusing on?
Oh, I'm a medievalist and a 16th century person. I'm really an early modern kind of girl. So for me, the Regency period in the early 19th century is extremely modern.
Right. Oh
And
my
I also work on magical shoes, just as a little thing, and that covers all sorts of times and places.
Yes, I did look into that a little bit. Because did you do a thesis on red shoes and how that's
On red
seen?
shoes.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Like Dorothy's magical shoes. I love that.
exactly. I'm actually right in the middle of preparing a talk for that for the museum at FIT Symposium on Wondrous Objects, all about the legacy of the ruby slippers, which is incredibly complicated and involves, theft and betrayal and all sorts of things.
Oh my goodness, that sounds great. Also, that's quite fitting as well, because obviously with Wicked, there's this whole new hype again around the
Hmm.
story of Oz, isn't there? So I love that. That's so exciting. That's really interesting then that you kind of were focusing more on medieval fashion, and that's like your speciality. So it'd be really good to talk about, what actually is Regency era? Where does that fall? And how did we even get to this point? Because what I notice a lot of people talking about is how different it is to a lot of other time periods, but yet it's very small. And so I don't think people realize it's an incredibly short period.
It's a really when the Regency period actually was is an interesting thing because we have a technical definition which is 1811 to 1820, and that's when King George III became incapacitated by illness, and his son, the Prince of Wales, through the Act of Regency in 1811, became Prince Regent and ruled Britain and all of its colonies in place of his father until his father died in 1820 and the Prince of Wales became George IV. So it's actually only an 9-year period, but the concept of the Regency is so evocative and has been so brought to life through, books both of the period. So, Jane Austen is kind of the definitive Regency writer, but also through romance novels like Georgette Heyer's work, that this concept of the Regency in the early 19th century really kind of runs a lot longer. And if you're looking at this through fashion, what we see, the definitive element of Regency fashion for women is the high-waisted gown. And this really starts to come in the mid 1790s, and it happens across Europe. The French Revolution is often given as the reason for it, but it's the same time, but it's not why it happened. And so what we have is this incredible rapid change in the 1790s from what were very stiff, formal dresses that kind of had quite heavily boned stays with them and really large skirts that, I'm sure lots of your listeners can sort of imagine, Marie Antoinette wearing a cake, basically. That's the epitome of 19th century dress. And then it changes incredibly rapidly to kind of dressing like a Grecian column, really, so that the waist is under the bust, that the clothing is sort of following the forms of the body more, and it's a complete contrast with what came before. And for men too, you get this change of emphasis from frock coats with skirts that really emphasize their hips and not so much of the shoulders, and more of that kind of 18th century formality. And you start to get a new appreciation of the body, and it's still inspired by classical forms. So a lot of emphasis on the shoulders, the legs get
Triangle.
revealed for the first time. Exactly, the inverted triangle. Whereas women used to have the inverted triangle, now
Right.
men get the inverted triangle, which is still kind of, the
Still
cultural ideal
popular.
of masculine shape, of, broad shoulders,
Yeah.
narrow waist. And it really starts to come in about this time. So what I find most interesting as a historian is what I think of as the long Regency from about 1795 to 1825. It's this period of tumult and change all across society, European society. But it's if in fashionable terms, it completely changes so many of the basic items of clothing that people wear. And it's this period of experimentation and change until about 1820. It's like everyone goes, okay, we think we know how to make a dress. We think we know what a suit goes. Are we good? We're good? Great. Let's go into the 1820s. And from there, all of 19th century fashion kind of develops and moves on. So, I mean, Regency is a very British term. The French are having whole lots of other things going on with the end of the French Revolution, the Directoire period, Napoleon's First Empire, and of course, France and Britain are at war for this. But I feel like Regency it's a great way to encapsulate this turn of the 19th century in the same way we might use like fin de siècle or Belle Époque to sort of encompass all of the turn into the 20th century.
Is that the most like active? Is that the most reflective side of that? Is it? Would you say that's when we see this happen again? Because I was
Yes.
thinking across fashion history, is it those two time periods in which they mirror each other in terms of like the amount of change?
I'd say so. I mean, I think at the end of the 15th century, actually, just to go back to the Middle Ages, we get really quite radical but slower happening changes of fashion from clothing that takes its form from the body to clothing that's much more structured and tailored and shapes the body, which really happens into the 16th century, and you get more tailored garments and a kind of a complete rethinking of how things work. And so that happens around the turn of the turn of the 19th century as well, and then definitely into the turn of the 20th, where you get that kind of incredible break that World War One gives us, and then we hit the 1920s, and the straight columnar dresses of the early 20th century are really quite radical when compared with dresses even 10 years before. And it's actually this kind of looking at longer lines that gives us the phrase that most people are familiar with for high-waisted gowns, which is empire line. But this description was never used at the time. Nobody in the Regency period, nobody in the French Empire ever said, I am wearing an empire line gown. This came about in 1907 when French designers really started looking back at these earlier dresses that were slimmer and more simple, and they started calling their lines directoire or empire. And it's from this kind of revision 100 years later by French designers that we now get the phrase empire line, which people often apply back to these kind of earlier high-waisted gowns, but it's anachronistic to call it that. They never called it that.
That's so funny. I suppose there's a lot with fashion where a lot of it is this looking back. It's the analysis after the fact that kind of puts the emphasis on it in some ways. Because when you're living in that time period, you don't necessarily think of your fashion as being unusual or unique because you're just living that moment, right? I'm thinking of now. I'm like, are we due another, transition period?
Well, we can, we fashion historians quite enjoy predicting what's going to come next based on what was there previously. But if you read fashion journalism of the time at the Regency, they are all very, very aware that what they're wearing is different to what came before, and they congratulate themselves on it like nobody's business. They're like, previously, fashion used to be ridiculous, but now we modern people, it's all sorted. Like, we now have the best taste. It's the most inestimably elegant thing that you could possibly wear. Like, that they are just, they know that they've got it. They like, this is the best thing that anybody has ever worn. It's hilarious.
I love that. That's so funny. But there also seems to be what I was getting the feeling from your books is there seems to be a marked interest in fashion as well, that people seem to be quite passionate about it, with keeping up with what's new and talking about it quite a lot. I know you pick up that quite a lot from Jane Austen's letters, which previously you state wasn't really what people were looking at in her letters.
Yeah, I mean, people have always been interested in fashion, and by which I mean what is new in what there is to wear. And one of the funniest things about fashion history in general is often the people who complain about it most are the people who give us lots of information. So the clerics who like, this clothing is ridiculous and women are wearing this and they're cutting their hair like this. You're like, thank you very much. You just told us everything we need to know. But it's really important for people to remember that at this point, pretty much all clothing was made to order. And so people had to be interested in their clothing in a very different way, because you couldn't just go online and buy it. You couldn't even just go to the shop and buy it. Some things you could, but if you're Jane Austen and you want a new gown, you have to go to the fabric store and pick out the fabric first. So that, and also clothing is much, much more expensive at the time. The textiles are more expensive. So you've only got a certain budget to spend. And that means that you're thinking about fashion really starts with, what kind of fabric am I buying? What quality is it? How is it going to last? How is this going to be suitable for the things that I've got coming up? Is this dress still going to be fashionable in a year? Is it going to suit like a number of occasions? Is it a color that suits me? And so there's a whole sort of train of thought that consumers had to go to, even to get clothing. And so once you've bought the fabric, you also have to know how much fabric you need to buy to make the thing. You then need to work out what style it is. And people had to do sort of negotiations individually between what's in fashion and what they feel comfortable with, and what their dressmaker perhaps says, well, have you tried this sleeve? This might work. There's a point in Jane Austen's letters where the dressmaker is saying, oh, like, I'm going to do it like this, and they trim with white, it's going to be great. And Austen says, I'm not sure. I'm not sanguine, but she kind of decides to go with the dressmaker because it's their job. So, think about what you're wearing now and imagine that you had to choose every single detail of it. How is the sleeve attached? What color is it? What neckline does it have? How long is the skirt going to be? How is that going to be finished? How are you going to trim it? Where are you going to trim it? If you're going to use white ribbons, are they going to go around the neck or around the shoulder? Do you have enough to put them around the skirt as well? So, and then you have to buy the trimmings separately. And then you have to wear it and accessorize it with all of the other bits and pieces, your stockings, your shoes, your fan, your gloves, your cap, your shawl, your flowers. And so it required a huge amount of thought. And fashionable people at the time, or kind of stylish people, it was a lot more kind of self-generated. And people, like, we're talking about middle-class people of Austen's milieu, they were really negotiating this kind of line between not being too fashionable, because that was, a bit tasteless, but also not being out of fashion to maintain respectability, which means you have to know what fashion is doing in order to understand and negotiate and create your own relationship with it through your clothing. It's much more complicated.
It also seems,
next time you hit buy on an online
think
thing,
about the process that it would have been. I mean, there is something quite lovely about the fact that it was more intentional and intimate. Like this is like a relationship with the garment. And what's so funny is I almost have like a bit of a meta experience with this because um the lady who makes my Regency dresses, like when I went to the festival and things, Abby, like I went and bought fabric and I took it to her and we had the discussion. And what's so funny is now realizing that actually what I did, well, and what I'm going to do again and what I have done is very similar to what it actually would have been like to have a Regency
Absolutely.
dress made.
Yeah, it really was. And you see, like, there's a point which in her letters, Jane Austen says, I've got through the dreadful epocha of mantua making better than expected. And she says, I wish such things were to be bought ready made. You can hear this kind of decision fatigue of like, I've had to get new clothes and it's been this whole ordeal, and I just wish I could go and choose something.
Yeah, and I can totally feel that. Like even when I was like discussing with Abby, I was like, I have no idea because it's just not my area. I mean, I'd love at some point, I love a hobby eventually. I'd love to make my own clothes. That would be amazing. Like that's definitely when I've got a bit more free time, it's on my top of my list to get lessons to learn how to sew properly. Um, but yeah, it's a lot to be thinking about for like I wonder if that is us with like our modern notion though, because of how easy it is for us to shop. Like you can just go online, you can browse. But I think I've always found maybe because I'm not stylish, but I've always found that I found it really tricky to shop nowadays because I can't have that kind of like control over what it is. Like the things about this dress, like you were saying, like I probably would change. Um, but then would you want to do that with every item? And I don't know. I feel like it's a bit exhausting at the same time.
Plus, what if you make a mistake? Then that's your dress and you just have to wear it, and it's going to annoy you every time you wear that dress that the sleeve doesn't quite fit right, or that, you cut it slightly too short.
Yeah, or if you just by happen just took the wrong amount of fabric and then they're just like, well, it's what it is now. You've already paid for it. So yeah,
Hmm.
I do really get that. So it'd be fabulous to talk about your process with Jane Austen's Pelisse then. Is it Pelisse? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, Pelisse, yeah.
Pelisse, yeah. Um, in I was just so fascinated by this. So actually, what sparked my whole like interest, like with like reading your books and everything, is when I've gone to Jane Austen's house a few times now, and I've actually seen the Pelisse there. It's just amazing. It feels like such a moment to be near something that is so potentially like connected to Jane Austen, which kind of says a lot about her figure and just like who she was, which I think is slightly different to the table, which is more about her work, right? More about what she was
Yeah.
created. So I think there is something special about it. But I'd love to hear the whole story about the Pelisse.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I find interesting about it is it is about Jane Austen as a person and as a woman and as a person living in her time and place who kind of moves through the world every day. So, in order to recreate something, you have to really study the original object. And I was privileged to have a day and a half in the stores with the original Pelisse, and I just recorded every single detail of it and took really detailed measurements and created a pattern from that, and took lots and lots of photos because I needed to look at lots of construction details, things like the lining or stitch patterns, stitch widths, seam allowances, while I wasn't going to be with the object. And then I made a toile out of calico, muslin for US listeners, and tested the pattern then. And that was when I kind of had my first insight about Jane Austen's figure, because I was sitting at home and I just finished sewing this, test pattern. And I was like, great, I've got, a toile of Jane Austen's Pelisse and I'm going to try it on. And I tried it on and I got stuck because she's super narrow across the shoulders. And I was like there with kind of my arms going, oh, this is not going to fit me. And can I get it out without tearing it? And that was my first
Oh,
insight into very different proportions of her body. I mean, I did a lot of, I call it hers because the provenance is very good, and nothing I've found during this very detailed research contradicted the story that it was Jane Austen's. And there's a lot of parallels with her life and what's known of her appearance. So I tend to call it Austen's Pelisse, but I'm like 98.7% sure. And so then I made another version in silk, but because I used something with the right weave, but not the right hand, as we call it. So it wasn't stiff enough. And the whole thing was too floppy and wouldn't stand up. And then I made another version from silk that was specially woven and then printed with the pattern that's on the pelisse, which is like little oak leaves in a kind of falling down pattern. And that worked really well. So that was the first kind of proof of concept replica where I knew that this pattern worked with this figure, but with this fabric. And it was kind of through this and like looking at the measurements that I really started to get a sense of the figure of the person who wore this. And they were tall for the period. I looked at skeletal records of, what the average height for women was during this period. And it's 5'2". So the average height for British women during this period, with no variation in socioeconomic area at all, was 5'2". And the person who wore this pelisse was at minimum 5'5" and more like 5'7". So definitely tall, categorically tall for the period,
Wow.
which completely matches how other people saw Austen and how she talked about herself. She talks about buying some fabric, 7 yards for her mother and 7.5 for me, as it is for a tall woman. And then the bust shape and the bust size, the proportions, there's actually a lot more at the front than at the back. And this isn't just about the size of her bust per se. It looks like it's actually to do with the structure of the ribs that have been slightly changed from I'm going to do this with my hands if people are looking, from sort of an oval shape, which is the body naturally, to a slightly more round shape, probably through wearing stays through early life. And the person who wore this has like a more rounded rib cage shape than modern people, which also tallies exactly with Austen. And just very, very slim through the body. I think the bust size is about 32 inches. And when I mapped this out, it's basically the same measurements as Kate Moss. So,
Wow.
Austen was a tall, slim figure, and this completely tallies with her descriptions, other people's descriptions, and I think my image of her is one of those people who is always slightly thin, sometimes has trouble putting on weight, which would have been difficult in the Regency period where curvier, plumper figures were actually more of an ideal of beauty.
Yeah.
Um, so, those kind of ideals of beauty or kind of body, ideal bodies at any period are always interesting to look at. And Austen's fits a fashionable ideal, I mean like high fashion today, but perhaps was not so regarded as beautiful in the period.
Because it was more tied
Uh,
to food, right? It was like if you look like you've got enough money to buy food, like good food, and eat more regular, then that
yeah,
it's,
it's
that
part of
makes you look
health to
healthier,
have,
right?
a good amount of flesh on your bones. It also means you exercise a lot and that you are prosperous and comfortable. And so much Regency fashion commentary is about, her the beauty of, a round plump arm at the top of a glove, and kind of thinness is uh, it's sort of seen as a detraction from beauty, that a kind of gorgeous roundness is far more appreciated, which you really see in pictures of the period as well of great beauties. They often have quite sort of rounded cheeks. They've got very soft shoulders. They're just curvier.
Yeah, and maybe again looking more at their, this tie that they had to kind of like more like Greek mythology styles and
Yeah,
things, is this kind of look of like the goddess kind of thing, like who they often are
exactly.
depicted more curvy, aren't they? So that's so interesting about Austen then, and then that isn't it fascinating that I mean maybe not to you because you do this all the time, but for me I think that's so fascinating. You can take one garment and you can take out all this information from it about her as a person. And like I said, I feel like that is the beauty of why it is different than the table, even though, we all cherish the table and everything, but this says something more about her person as opposed to her craft. So yeah.
And it's because we don't have great portraits of Austen. The only two 100% verifiable pictures of Austen are sketches done by her sister Cassandra. One is unfinished, facing forward, and the other one is sitting down on a ground, looking, from the back.
Yeah.
So this kind of, imagine if the only thing that was left to what you looked like of history was a sketch, a half-finished sketch your sister did. And there's this kind of, because Austen is so beloved, there's this really great interest in wanting to know what she looked like.
Mm.
And as I talk about when I talk about my second book, she's one of the three great authors of the English language. It's Shakespeare, Austen, and Dickens. And we've got better images of Shakespeare, and Dickens lived later in the 19th century and was more celebrated. Jane Austen's name didn't appear on her work until after her death. So we know what these men look like, but Austen also being a woman at this period, she's got less documentary presence. She's elusive in her appearance. And so anything that can give us an insight into maybe what she looked like, how she experienced the world, her own sort of physicality and experience of being a human, because, this is really what fuels her incredible writing, is the way she observed the humans around her.
I love this.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, what's her experience of being a human, and clothing is a way into that.
And I think this is just like a really fascinating concept anyway, about this, like the documenting of women, like their appearance and everything. I was listening to another podcast. I can't quite remember what it is right now, but they were talking about the dangers of social media. And I like to see both sides to an argument. Although I can absolutely see the dangers of social media for women, how it's affected mental health and things, and the comparison with like other women and stuff. But then I was also thinking, wow, what a blessing that we can document our own stories, our own images. Like, we can control that narrative now and put those photos of us out there, because realistically, like way back then, it may have been a half finished like drawing by my sister, or alternatively, if I'd married, I might have had a portrait done that my husband commissioned. Like, there is something about us being able to capture ourselves now and display that, I think.
Yeah. And how we do that and how we think about that. But then also, I think in Regency terms, they might say we think too much about our own images. We should be we should be thinking about other virtues and not what we look like.
It's so true. Just because you touched on the illustration that Cassandra did from Jane Austen, and it's her back, and it's the blue dress with the buttons down the back.
Yeah.
I just love to talk about this transition of the front of like women's dresses as well, because there was the bib, there's the kind of the cross dress, like where it crosses at the front, and then how did we transition to buttons at the back? Was that all in this
Well, I
same?
feel that this is an underrated aspect of Regency dress. Fashion history is often looked at stylistically and not constructionally. And so the high-waisted gowns, we all know about that. We all know the waist goes up. And then somehow by sort of the 1820s, most dresses open at the back. But because I make and because I'm interested in the materiality of clothing, I'm like, well, how did we get from gowns that always opened in the front to a 180 twist to opening at the back? And that's what you really see is this kind of period of like constructional experimentation and inventiveness. And all of these, the full apron front, the wrap front that crosses over, as it was called, all of these things existed at the same time. And as far as I can tell, the buttons start almost as a decorative thing while they still open at the front. And then they come through to be constructional. And often they would have hooks and eyes in the dress and then buttons on top, so they're not actually buttoning up, they're just looking like they are.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of this has to do with the changes in what's being worn underneath, because the stays are kind of developing into corsets at this period, and there's a difference between the two. Corsets are lighter and less heavily boned and often made of fabric, and also had space for two breasts. So the terms are used for sort of interchangeably. Sorry, that makes it sound like stays are only made for one-breasted women. But what I mean is they had two separate cups, like modern brassieres, rather than this kind of smooth kind of monobosom look that earlier stays had. And people were experimenting with stays and corsets at the same time as well. But what you kind of get is once that the first period of experimentation is gone in the 1790s, in the 1800s, you start to get almost like a stable bosom, that they're like, okay, now we kind of work this out. And then they start, once you can, what shape the bosom at the front is going to be, you can make things open at the back, because it changes. Like if the front is stable, you can start doing decorative treatments on it. You can cut it because you know it's going to be the one shape, and so things can open at the back in a different way. So as what people conceive of a gown being changes, they change how it gets constructed.
That is so fascinating. So my dress, I literally put it here just like for this purpose. It's got a bib front, so it opens and clips. It's got the little
Mm-hmm.
hook and eye, and then it's got the button on the
Mm-hmm.
front.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
in Because Abby is fantastic, and she wanted to make one that was had the bib front for me. But what I found is it did matter what bra I was wearing. Like that makes a
Exactly.
massive difference, like hugely. And so yeah, I can totally understand that it would change with once you've got that like set. Like for me now, I'm like there is just one bra that I can be wearing with
That's
this
it.
for it to work. So
That's it. And it's also, I mean, it comes to from the notion of the frock, which is sort of, it was a children's garment, but it's sort of, looser, more casual and did up at the back. And so that's sort of that, hey, we could do things like this, but for adults also comes through too. But yeah, it really does depend on basically how have you shaped your breasts that morning, which is really what stays and corsets do. And the whole thing about tight lacing at this period is irrelevant because you don't have a waist. So why would you need to tight lace? And when you look at what women themselves say about stays and corsets, it is, first of all, it is to shape and support the breasts. Like there's a reason for that. And obviously breasts come in all shapes and sizes. And if you have larger ones, you need to sort of, do something with them, especially if you're going to put a gown on over the top. But they also talk about it as something for warmth. Like this is another layer of clothing that they're adding for warmth. They also provided support during and after childbirth. They're quite good for kind of helping the muscles. Just take some of the strain off the muscles. So, corsets are probably the most maligned and misunderstood garment in fashion history. And yeah, it's women wore them exactly like bras. You've got everything from the sports bra to the push-up bra. They all do different things. You wear them at different times with different garments on top, and they're there as a practical garment and not this kind of instrument of torture that women were somehow forced into for 400 years. So yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's important because it's definitely a misconception. It's definitely one I had for the longest time. Till me and Shannon were looking at the adaptations, and she was like, "This, the idea of them pulling people into this is totally like unrealistic. It would
Totally.
not
And
have
again, like if you
happened.
can't see the waist, why
Why
would you
would you
want to
do it?
do?
Why are you
Sorry.
making a waist when there's no waist being seen? It's so true. Moving slightly down then, I'd love to talk a little bit about shoes and the different shoes that people would wear. So, the reason I got interested in this is when I was looking at your depictions of like Marianne Knight's shoes, what they were used for, and then the discussion around ball shoes. So I didn't realize this that you would walk in like your just like normal shoes, and then you would change into these kind of slippers for balls and dances.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that shoes at this period, again, something to sort of we've lost through modern encounters with shoes. They're more consumable objects. They wear out a lot more quickly because they've got leather soles. So people conserve and use their garments in different ways to make sure that they don't wear out too quickly. And the shoes, the sort of, stouter shoes or boots that would take you into the carriage and down the gravel drive and up the steps, you don't want to be dancing on them. One, because you're going to hurt somebody's floor. But two, you can't wear your light ball shoes because they've only got a thin leather sole. And that's just going to trash the sole that, you could wear a pair through just in dancing that one night. So it's about kind of, yeah, it's like wearing your trainers to the office and then slipping into your heels once you're there. And yeah, then you pull out your dancing shoes, and this is for men and women too. It wasn't just women who were doing this. And then you can dance the night away in your lighter, as it were, sportswear designed shoes, and then change into your other ones at the end of the night, which are also probably a little bit warmer to take you back in the carriage, the unheated carriage at the wee small hours of the morning.
Is it true that they don't have a left and right for the ball slippers as well?
Generally true. Some left and rights are coming in at this period. They tend to be more for men's shoes. Or the thing is that the difference between the left and right is so subtle that people haven't noticed it. So it's generally straights, as they're called, but not exclusively.
Amazing. And your normal shoes that we're discussing now that would get you back into the carriage things, are they the same as walking boots or are these two different types of shoes?
Well, it depends what I mean, you could wear slippers in your carriage, or you could wear list shoes made out of woolen selvages woven together, or just kind of, fluffy fur-lined overshoes. But yeah, otherwise you could wear your walking shoes, your, everyday boots, half boots as they were called for women.
Yeah,
The
that makes
one
sense.
thing that's definitely clear is that men never wore boots in the ballroom to dance with. You could wear boots to the ball as part of military dress, military or naval dress, but you would never dance in them.
Ah, and you would again, men would also have these kind of more
Yeah,
thin
they would
leather
have
soled
evening pumps.
shoes.
Yeah,
Evening
yeah,
pumps. Okay.
evening
Awesome.
pumps.
I love that. So what I want to touch on now is fashion plates because I really love these. It's actually what I used as I'm having my second dress made. I actually went back to fashion plates to try and find inspiration from them and things. But I just like to understand them more because part of me was a little bit like, are these actual fashion plates from the Regency era? Some of these images that we see like in your book and everything. What were the purpose for them in that time period? Um, like my impression is that it was kind of like a Pinterest board that you just have all these images and they would be your inspo to like create your outfits. But I don't know for sure, so I'd love to know about them.
I think we greatly overestimate the impact of the visual dimension of fashion plates now because of Pinterest boards and fashion magazines and things like that. Uh, I will say that in what, oh gosh, we're 18 years of researching this. I have not yet found one actual period example of a woman taking a fashion plate to a dressmaker to have her clothing made from it or refer to it in any way, shape, or form. Austen doesn't do it. And I've not found other things. I mean, there's a whole lot of material out there, but I haven't come across women going, I want this to their dressmaker. As far as I can tell, knowledge about fashion comes far more from watching people and from talking between people. And it's this textual dimension and the kind of the context that it's really important to bring into any study of fashion plates because again we see them now as just this spread of gorgeous images of women in the period, but they all come from different magazines and all of those magazines have a different price point, a different readership, a different quality of illustrator, a different source for the images. So for example, La Belle Assemblée, which is one of the most enduring and expensive fashion magazines, they constantly have these outfits in them that are over the top. And they're always like, this is to be had exclusively from Mrs. Bell. It's very much Mrs. Bell or Madame Lancaster. And when you look at them compared with what people were actually wearing, when we see the kind of the picture that you build up from other sources and from paintings and from the real object, these are like the Vogue styled fashion shoot versions of Regency dress, where it's kind of like ultra fashion to the point of being slightly ridiculous with a lot of them. So if you're taking one of those for inspiration, that's different to something like the Ladies Monthly magazine, which has just more subdued fashion plates. The detail in them is less. The engravings in Belle Assemblée are really detailed. Ladies magazine, it's just a little simpler, but it seems to reflect real dress more. So like not all fashion plates are created equal. And then we tend to take them as separate images that convey all of the information. But that's not how people at the time encountered them because these came with text. And the text is the important thing, and the images are only there as an adjunct to show you what the text describes. And it's once you get into the text that you really start to understand the details of Regency dress, because every single one of those fashion plates that we see now had a description of what it was actually made of. What the color is, what the trimming is, what the fabric is, and often they have variations where it's like, oh, you can use a cambric or a jaconet muslin, or they'll say something like, this pelisse is in the new Prussian blue, and you look at the image and it's been painted green because that's what the illustrator did. And then not only that, but after the description of the fashion plates, comes a whole lot of fashion commentary that is all based in color and textile and this very haptic, tactile, material understanding of what fashion is. So again, if we go back to this idea that to buy a dress, you had to choose the fabric, it's important in a fashion plate that it tells you what fabric it's made of. Because if you've got this beautiful evening dress, say a pink fluffy ball gown from 1817, the captions will tell you, is this made of sarsenet silk? Is this made of gauze? Is this made of some new fabric that's just been invented? And that really matters to the consumer, because if they want to make that, they need to know what it's made of. And is this like, what kind of lace trim? What is the alternatives that you could do here? How is this put together? And sometimes they'll give you, this is attached here and here and here. So because people understood clothing through things, the fashion plates need to be taken ideally with the text that tells you what those things were. And it just gives you a totally different perspective on the plate and how to interpret it, plus the context of the magazines. Now, I know a lot of listeners at this point are going, oh, that seems like a whole lot of work to look into. But because so much has been digitized now, it's often really easy to find the text that accompanies that. And I just encourage anyone who is looking at a particular plate to maybe just dig a little bit more and just see if you can find the caption for that plate. Because again, if you're trying to make something, it's going to tell you what it's made of in a really useful way. And more magazines are being digitized every day. It's really a kind of a golden time for understanding fashion plates a little bit more like people at the time did.
That's amazing, and I definitely want to do that. Where's the best place for people to go and find that information then?
Start with the Internet Archive or Hathi Trust. They tend to have the best options there. You can often find a lot of things on Google Books, which is the dedicated kind of book searching function of Google. And between those three, you can tend to find what you want. If you really want to get into something slightly more obscure, this is very specific, but it's a great resource. The library of the Bunka Gakuen Fashion School in Japan has some really great digitizations of fashion magazines, including the full run of the Gallery of Fashion, which ran from 1793 to, I'm going to say, 1804, and has some of the most recognizable and most reproduced plates in it. So you can, with that, you can find the Bunka Gakuen library, and there's just a trove of textual richness.
Amazing. Oh, I love that. That's so interesting as well. Yeah, that there is no evidence so far that you found of people actually taking these plates and being like, I want this dress. Because as well, they would have already had, like you said, so much understanding themselves that they wouldn't necessarily would need to do that anyway, because they would be able to they'd be able to kind of process the information, then go and discuss it.
I mean, think about like walking down the street in any city. Think about how many people you see wearing clothes. Now, imagine that was your fashion inspo, that you'd be going, oh, I like her sleeve, or actually that color looks really great on it. And you're just absorbing what people are wearing. And one of the things that Jane Austen and her sister Cassandra do in the letters is they talk about fashion. And when one of them is in London, she'll tell the other what's going on. And this comes through in the fiction as well, where in Pride and Prejudice, for example, when Mrs. Bennet's sister, Mrs. Gardiner, comes from London, like one of the first things that Mrs. Bennet does is like get the news of the fashions from London. And so people told each other what they saw. And it was also like a really great way of kind of summarizing it, because if you'd been in London, you might have seen that everyone is wearing, what did Jane Austen notice? Braces. So kind of straps across the dress, holding up petticoats. And that's her kind of distilled information of like, oh yeah, I've seen everybody wearing this. In a way that, now you might be like, why is everyone wearing this one particular brand of puffer jacket or something? And so when someone else tells you, oh, everyone's wearing this, it kind of has a bit more authority than some fashion magazine saying, oh yeah, this is definitely the fashionable thing. It's got a bit more verifiable, like, oh, I trust her, I know her, she's going to set me straight and not make me wear something ridiculous that isn't in fashion.
Right, yeah. Oh my goodness. I love that. And also, something just briefly I want to touch on about Jane and Cassandra is the fact that they would, share clothes as well,
Yeah.
which I love. I mean, I share clothes with my best friend. It's fab because it means that I have an extended wardrobe. Um, but yeah, I feel like again, there's something a lot more intentional. Like people would recycle their outfits, right? And they would use them to make other things. They would share with people. Again, I'm guessing that's because it was expensive. So you would only have so much. So you would share your garments so that it would go further.
And there's a great line about that in Persuasion when Captain Wentworth is talking about a ship that he knows very well. And in order to explain it to in the context of something that the young woman he's talking to would understand, he says something like, "I had no more discoveries to make about it than you had some old pelisse which had been lent around the neighborhood, and on one very wet day was lent to yourself." And so it's got this sense of, a communal garment that, like, oh yeah, it's that pelisse. I've been at her, someone's house. I'm trying to walk home. It's going to rain. I'll borrow the pelisse, and then it's kind of this communal garment that gets passed around. And I think it's such a great metaphor for that kind of shared experience of clothing.
I love that. Wentworth loves a metaphor, honestly. He has some great ones in that book.
Wentworth is the best. He's my favorite Austen hero.
Is
So
he?
he
Oh,
is. Yeah,
that's so
yeah, yeah. I'd
interesting.
push aside Darcy to get to Wentworth.
I love that. That's so funny. Yeah, he doesn't always come up as people's favorites just because, he is a bit dodgy with Louisa and, with Anna and stuff at that moment. But I think he's got some amazing qualities. I also do love Wentworth. Talking of Wentworth then, and just gentlemen of the time period, could we chat a little bit about men's fashion and what makes up men's fashion? Because this isn't something that I've discussed on the podcast before, so it'd be great. This is introduction to everyone listening, unless they already know, obviously.
So men's fashion at the time, it consists of a lot of the basic garments that have been established in men's fashion for hundreds of years at that point. So he'd start off by wearing a linen shirt underneath, which usually reached sort of to mid-thigh. And then over the top of that, he could put a separate pair of kind of washable drawers if he wanted to, but not necessarily. You can also tuck the shirt between your legs. And then on top of that, he's then going to put on some kind of legwear. And one of the interesting things about the Regency period is men suddenly have more options for legwear than they did before. So previously, the default garment for men to wear on their legs was breeches, which they pronounce breeches. And that is kind of trousers that are like quite baggy at the bottom to allow for movement, that reach below the knee. And they stop there, and then the rest of your leg is covered by stockings. And for working men, they had something they called trousers, which reached all the way to the bottom of your leg and were kind of looser, slightly looser and more convenient to work with. And sailors wore them, sometimes labouring men wore them, but they weren't a polite garment. And they suddenly, in sort of an example of trickle up, they started to become really fashionable during the 1790s. And trousers slowly became part of menswear until by the 1820s they were totally acceptable for evening wear, although court dress still required breeches. So men's leg could now be completely covered by one kind of garment. And another kind of garment that was coming in at this point were pantaloons. And these were where trousers were kind of loose around the leg. Pantaloons are like leggings. They're tight all the way down. And this comes from the military because tight-legged trousers like this, they fit easily into boots for riding. So with the rise of the military conflicts in the 1790s, pantaloons became far more popular. And a whole lot of military clothing started to influence male dress, as did riding clothing. So boots also started to become acceptable day wear. And if we think about riding dress or military dress as kind of activewear or sportswear, it's a similar thing that's happened in the 21st century, where what was previously casual clothing has become okay in more formal situations. And it's exactly the same in the Regency period. So you could start to wear riding boots in town, just walking around, whereas previously you would wear them only for riding. And a lot of details like capes on coats came from coachmen. And there's all of these complaints in fashion about, like, my son just looks like a jockey, or he's trying to imitate his groom, and I don't know what kids these days are up to. It's hilarious. So that's our legwear sorted, although men are also wearing sort of, plain black shoes. They could still be wearing breeches, but breeches start to look a bit old-fashioned as we get into sort of the 1810s. And then on top of their shirt, they'll wear a waistcoat. And the waistcoat fronts are getting shorter and shorter at this period, so they really are revealing a lot more of the grey leg and particularly the groin in a different way. And the waistcoat could be, it's all sorts of colors and I was going to say flavors, but I mean weights of fabric depending on the season. But if a man is walking around in just a shirt and his breeches, he's basically undressed. So he's puts a waistcoat on top of that to be dressed, but even to be in your shirt sleeves is a bit risque.
Oh,
And
so
on
in
top,
like the 2020 Emma where Mr. Knightley like comes in and he's just like in his shirt and yeah, wow. That's
yeah,
so
that's
interesting.
quite intimate. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So on top of that, you put a coat, and one of the key points about coats at this point is that they have tails. So, we still have the tailcoat with us, but you kind of cut off the front of the coat and then just leave the tails at the back. This is a new style for the period, and it's, there's lots of variations, but it's also, like I said before, it's kind of building up around the shoulders. You've got more emphasis on that kind of shoulder and neck period place. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you're also tying something around your collar to hold it up because collars sometimes only have like one button there, but otherwise they're just sort of square, uh, rectangular things that need to be held up by a neckcloth or a cravat or a handkerchief. So men are tying something around there. And then if that wasn't enough clothing, you can also put on a greatcoat, which just means great as in, like the big coat. And that was a coat that you would, put on over the top to if you're riding or out in the weather, and just an extra layer of warmth. And then you top that off with a hat of some kind, and then a stick or cane, as it were, and probably put a nice handkerchief in your pocket, and you're good to go.
Wow, layers seems to be
So many
the
layers.
seems to be what men go for. Certainly, my goodness, that's definitely a lot um, to have on. But that's really interesting about the trousers that they had. That's
Mm,
similar to the waistline and things, I suppose, or the change from the cross to the back. I suppose again, it's that experimentation, isn't it? And it's like, well, actually,
completely.
what's practical?
Yeah, and this, this thing that used to be a working garment. Think about jeans. Jeans were only a working garment. They were worn by miners, they were used by cowboys. Like this is totally functional wear. And then throughout the 20th century, it became just, a normal piece of clothing. And that's pretty much what happened with trousers as well.
That's so interesting. And also the thing about jackets as well. We see, men's fashion with jackets that also kind of is mirrored with women's jackets, with the fact that with the Spencer jacket becomes their popular, they kind of mirror in the sense that they've kind of gone for this like military jacket style.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, the Spencer was a male garment first, and it's a short coat without tails that can go over a coat with tails. And so there's a lot of details in women's dress that come from military, that come from male clothing, and the Spencer is one of them. Although, really, I was looking into a lot of the language of Regency fashion for my new book, which comes out in October 2025, A Guide to Regency Dress, which is just more of a dictionary or glossary about this. And when you look into it, for women's dress, they call it a jacket about as often as they call it a Spencer. And I think we tend to call all of those short jackets always, it's all Spencers all the time now. But they sometimes call it a jacket, or, they've got like different kind of variations for it. It's still a good summary word. But yeah, they had some variations there as well.
Love that. That's amazing. There's one more thing that I really would love to chat about, and that is why needlework is historically important. So I saw this like pop up in a few things that you've been talking about, and I'd love to touch on this. Is this in the relation to it in the domestic sphere and just like how women, it was kind of a form where women could kind of bond and socialize?
Well, it's also how you get clothes, right?
And that,
So
yeah. If you want to be dressed, it's also
you want
important.
to have clothes on. I mean, there's hierarchies of sewing, and a lot of middle class women did get their outer garments made by other women. but they could make clothes themselves. But where they're doing a lot of sewing is the linen undergarments. So men would have shirts made in sets of six, and then women have their own sort of shorter shirts, shifts, which they're wearing underneath their clothing at all times, especially underneath their corsets, nightgowns, clothing for children, clothing for babies. It's a constant set of sewing because it's really hard to go out and get those things. So it's kind of seen as part of women's responsibilities was to make the clothes. And this, yeah, I mean, you can engage with it as much or little as you like, but there's also clear distinctions in Regency texts between kind of uh, virtuous needlework and frivolous needlework. And the kind of virtuous needlework is if you're not making clothing for your family, you're making it for the poor who literally have nowhere to get clothes. So there's all of these instruction booklets about how to make baby layettes for poor women, and like a full set of childbed linen, clothing for the new baby, things for the mother like bed jackets, nappies, you because they literally cannot go out and buy them, or knitting stockings. So there's a lot of work of just the basic clothing. But if you have people to do all of that for you and you can engage more in kind of fancy work, as it's called, sometimes there's a little bit of kind of moral disapproval of this, which Austen really highlights in Mansfield Park. Lady Bertram, who doesn't do anything at all for anyone at any time, she just lolls around on the couch. It's always mentioned that Fanny Price has to do the difficult bits of her needlework for her, and all Lady Bertram does is, sit on the couch doing this long piece of needlework that's no good for anyone. It doesn't help anyone. It's merely decorative, and she can't even do that very well. Fanny has to help her. So, I mean, there's still a lot of pleasure in making beautiful things, and women are also making a lot of objects that reinforce social bonds. So they're doing it as gifts for other people, keepsakes, remembrances. And there is certainly a social dimension in making clothes together, sewing together. But yeah, it's a combination of creativity and necessity. If you read Pride and Prejudice closely, there's points at which Lizzie is trimming a hat, and there's kind of, I think that's been evoked in a couple of the adaptations where all the girls are just sitting down working on stuff together. And if you're a young woman at the time and you want to have the most fashionable hat, you have to do it yourself. So, kind of changing the trimmings on your hat is like really important because all the girls in the village are going to be watching what you're wearing. And yeah, so there's all of these dimensions about necessity, creativity, sociability for needlework. But it's certainly not that whole, I feel, again, there's quite a sort of destructive trope that comes through in fiction adaptations of like, yeah, I'm a modern girl and I'm not gonna, do this boring needlework. I'm gonna go and like ride a horse, hair toss. And it really underestimates the incredible skill that women had and the love and the care and the thought that they're putting into their needlework and just how much it creates their world and demonstrates care for the people that they love. So really important for women.
Yeah, and it's such a lost skill set as well. Like it's incredibly
Mhm.
hard. Like here, like there's a lady who my nan knows who takes up my dresses a lot of the time, but that's just like normal dresses just because I'm quite short, so they have to go up a lot. But it's not easy to find people who've just got that skill set, and like she doesn't do it for a living. Like she can do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really sad. Like that's again why I'd love to be able to learn how to make my own clothes or mend my own clothes. Um, so yeah, I think that's super interesting. But I also love what you were saying about the reasons why people might create too. And like, if you're doing it for the poor and things, because I feel like that links back to another point in your book that one of your books that you were making about how Jane Austen often ties fashion or the perception of fashion with morals in the book. And it's like
Yeah.
if you're someone who's quite flamboyant about your fashion, that you're always talking about it, you're not necessarily
Mrs. Elton.
right, right. Compared to like say, well, a lot of the heroines don't necessarily always like fixate on what they're wearing. Or like Caroline Bingley and Mrs. Hurst about the 6 inches, like deep in mud,
Mhm.
like the fact, or saying that Lizzie has no style, like they're really mean about it. So yeah, it's really interesting that, and I wonder why Austen felt to match those two things.
Oh, it's very much part of the period. There's, a lot of critique of fashion, and fashion is often seen as this kind of it. Fashion is a tyrant. Fashion is a thing that will swoop down out of the skies and grab you in its claws, and then you'll be stuck in fashion. And there's a lot of kind of anti-fashion critique because it's kind of seen as, all of the reasons that we still have critiques about fashion. Oh, it's, frivolous and vain and superficial. But then on the other hand, there are some critiques of it where you see people saying, yeah, but it's actually rich people's duty to spend on clothing and fashion because they are helping industry and helping the poor and benefiting those who are less fortunate than them in commissioning things to be made. But again, there's still that kind of middle class thing of like, okay, you can't be super in fashion because that means you're thinking too much about yourself and how you look. But you can't be out of fashion. You have to maintain this line of respectability. And that kind of line between morality and pleasure and fashion and appropriateness and kind of like delight in clothes, but then also not thinking about it. It's an axis or a spectrum that's a subtle one that people thought a lot about. And, part of Austen's genius is that she can present all the kind of sides of that situation at the same time, usually.
Yeah, and across multiple different things as well. Like we see her
Mm.
do it often with like nature as well. People who favor
Mm-hmm.
nature, those who don't, or don't appreciate
Sense
nature.
and sensibility, how do you find the balance between rationality and not expressing your feelings or, letting it all hang out, but also, being creative that way. So
Yeah, she seems to always be discussing this fine balance and just like where is the line drawn. No, I love that. This has been fantastic. Honestly, I've taken so much from this, and I take so much from your books. Honestly, um, yeah, I'd love for you to just let everyone know again your new book out in the autumn.
that's right. So, new book out in the autumn. The full glorious title is A Guide to Regency Dress from Corsets and Breeches to Bonnets and Muslin. And while it's not focused on Jane Austen this time, it is just like it's an introductory guide to Regency dress, looking at women's clothing, men's clothing, but also focusing on hair and beauty, jewelry, and textiles and trimmings. So just kind of a guide to like what is a thing? What was a Spencer at the time? What did they mean by this? What is a cambric or a jaconet muslin? And just kind of give people what I wanted to do was like shake out my head of the last 18 years of research and go, when I read these words in fashion plates, this is what I understand by it, and just kind of give people a way into understanding Regency clothing the way that they may have. So I hope it's accessible to a wide range of people, and can help curators. I do more identification, can help people who make get new fabric ideas, or just kind of clarify a lot of what these clothing and textile terms meant for people at the time.
I love that. And I'm sure it will be because something that I love about your books is they are accessible, but they're also extensive. Like there is so much information packed in here that's just so useful and just like areas of Regency fashion I would not know about. If anybody is interested in learning more about this, I 100% recommend getting Hilary's books.
Thank
I
you.
have both. This one,
Dress in the Age of
Dress.
Jane Austen. It was the first one.
This was the first
Ni-
one. And
Followed
then
by
Dress is number two.
Jane Austen's wardrobe. So the first book looks just broadly at uh, the cultures of Regency clothing and textiles through the lens of Jane Austen's life and writing. And then the second one, Jane Austen's wardrobe, looks at what we can know Austen herself wore based on the letters and some surviving garments.
Yes, and for anyone, and most of my listeners, I know you're all big fans of the text. We analyze the text a lot on the podcast. This is just a beautiful way to view the text as well from a lens that you maybe haven't before, and just like looking more at like garments and Jane Austen's letters as well. So yeah, absolutely recommend both of these and Hilary's new book, which I will also be getting because I am on a new journey with this fashion, Regency fashion. But yeah, this has been so fantastic, Hilary. And where can people find you to keep up to date with what's going on social media?
I have a website, so hilarydavidson.net. Note that's Hilary with one L. And then I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky at Four Red Shoes. So FOURREDSHOES.
And I will also tag everything below as always. Thank you so much, Hilary. It's been an
My
absolute
pleasure.
pleasure. And
Likewise.
I will see you all in another episode.